Hi, everyone. I'm Jodi Rudoren. I'm editor-in-chief of The Forward. Thank you so much for coming today. We're going to give people a minute to roll in. We've got many, many hundreds of you signed up for this great conversation. So while you're settling in on your couch or wherever you are, please post in the chat where you're dialing in from, what your relationship is to The Forward or Joshua Malina or Rabbi Shira Stutman or Chutzpod or anything else you might want to tell us about what brought you here today. And we will be getting started in just a few minutes, but we'd love to hear from you in the chat, who you are, why you're here, stray thoughts about the Parsha, if you want. And remember to chat to, not someone just chatted to host and panelists, make sure you're chatting to everyone so that everyone can see it.
Oh, I didn't follow your instructions.
Whoa, Australia weighing in. That's exciting. What time is it in Australia? 13 hours ahead, something like that? Newton, Massachusetts, my hometown. Love to see that. Sure, we have other rabbis on the call, so I know that won't make you nervous at all. Once again, if you're just joining us, I'm Jodi Rudoren. I'm editor-in-chief of The Forward. So excited for this conversation and to have all of you here. We are introducing ourselves in the chat. And if you want to play Jewish geography, if you see someone that you went to camp with, please feel free to shout out. If you went to camp with Joshua Malina, please feel free to share tidbits from that experience. More rabbis, people who love The Forward. This is great. And my aunt is on the call. That's exciting. Hi, Carol. And it looks like Joshua Malina's parents are on the call.
That's not a shocker, but a delight.
Very exciting. We've got it. We're going to give it like another minute. Just some tachlis in advance, which I will probably repeat, but you will get a recording of this in your email. So if you miss anything, don't worry about it. And we'd love it if you share the video with your friends or on your social media. That is always a great way to extend our events and our journalism. We love when you use the chat to comment on what you're hearing or share personal reflections on what you're hearing or your own experience. We do like to use the Q&A button, which is probably right near the chat button on whatever device you're on, for the Q's and the A's. So if you have a question that you want me to ask Joshua Malina and Rabbi Shira Stutman, please put it in the Q&A, not in the chat, because the chat gets very crowded and confusing. And I'll start out also by thanking Aaron White, who's hosting us tonight and doing all the tech and making sure we stay connected. We're going to start in like maybe another minute. So just settle in. Ireland, I see, that's exciting. My boss is dialing in from the train coming back from the city. Excellent. All right, we might be good to go, Aaron. What do you think?
Sounds good. I'm going to hop off this title card.
Once again, welcome everybody. My name's Jodi. I'm editor-in-chief of The Forward, oldest, and according to the New York Times, most prominent Jewish news organization in the country. And I'm so excited for this conversation, like seriously excited. It's something I've been wanting to do for my whole time here. So I'm going to start with some quick introductions. First, we have Joshua Malina. If you're like me, you know Joshua primarily as Will Bailey on The West Wing. He also starred in Sports Night and Scandal and played President Seabird on The Big Bang Theory. And he's been in a bunch of movies, Bulworth, In the Line of Fire, A View from the Top. And of course, co-hosted PRX's huge hit podcast, The West Wing Weekly. And his partner in this new endeavor is Rabbi Shira Stutman. She's a Reconstructionist rabbi and was a Wexner Fellow, a very elite and important group. And she was the founding rabbi of Sixth and I, the historic synagogue in Washington, D.C., where I hosted an event just 2 days ago from this very couch. And she is right now, in addition to doing this podcast, writing a book on the blessing of interfaith couples. Rabbi Stutman and Joshua Malina started Chutzpod something like 2 months ago, 6 weeks ago or something. Their sixth episode will be coming out this week. And before we get into it, I also really like, because this is actually really all about me, I always try to offer some introductions that are about how you all are connected to me, which you don't necessarily know about. But Shira, as I just noted, you were the founding rabbi at Sixth and I did an event at Sixth and I. You were on the Forward's 2013 list of most inspiring rabbis. I had nothing to do with that list, but I do now have something to do with the Forward. And my Hebrew name is Shira. So that's a big one. Now, Josh, you and I both went to Yale, though you are a couple of years older than me. And we both grew up in Orthodox synagogues, you in Scarsdale and me in Newton. And you were a star on the West Wing. And I, and especially my husband, are the original super fans of the West Wing. And I just want to share, I feel I have this little object that I want to share, which is huge fans of the West Wing will just know instantly what this is. But this is what my husband gave me in our Yichud room after we got married. And it says, Gary for Jodi, written on a napkin, just like Leo wrote on a napkin for Jed Bartlett for America. So I don't know if that's pathetic or adorable or what you all think, but I've never really been able to tell that story in any public way because it is way too inside baseball, but here we are.
No, pathetic this is what I gave my wife for our Yichud. She was not impressed.
Well, that is a very, and it's you and the picture of you. I mean, who could want more?
Many women.
So I said, and we talked about you guys are co-hosting this new venture called Chutzpod. It's a weekly podcast that looks at the Torah portion and applies it to modern life, modern issues. I want to hear all about how and why you are doing that. I want to start with one of the favorite questions that I love to ask couples, which is how you met. And I don't want to start any, problems in your marriages or rumors, but I just want to talk about how you guys got together. I know you met, I think, on an encounter trip, right? Which is Encounter is the group that takes American Jewish leaders to visit the West Bank and to meet with Palestinians. And you guys went, I don't remember what year it is that you went, but
he's 17, I believe.
I want to hear about how the magic happened, how you guys made a connection. What was the spark, as opposed to just like, oh yeah, I once went on a trip with her. What happened? How do we get from there to here?
We originally met briefly before that, right? I'm trying to remember the chronology. I did an event at Sixth and I, so I feel like we hit it off the first time we met, and we really got to know each other better on this encounter trip. Again, it's a fantastic organization that takes people across the political spectrum, people who are Jewish influencers. I think I barely cleared the bar. I felt a little bit like an imposter because it was really distinguished people, rabbis and teachers and members of boards of important organizations and educators. And then, and the guy from the West Wing. But I was delighted to be there. The idea was to expose these so-called Jewish influencers to a narrative that's maybe a little bit different from what most of us had grown up with and spent most of our lives with vis-a-vis Israel. I will also add, and I think this is one of the beauties of the program, is that a love of Israel, Ahavat Yisrael, was a prerequisite. So this was not a group of haters. This is a group of people who love Israel so much that we want to see we want to learn everything we can about Israel, and we feel that we have a stake in it. And you spend a lot of time on a trip like this in the back of a bus, decompressing from what can be troubling, upsetting, intense encounters and interviews, and you usually tell funny stories and maybe sing songs and get to know each other. And so it's kind of an intense atmosphere, and we became friends, and I met a lot of people from whom I've learned a lot on that trip, Rabbi Shira among them.
Rabbi Shira, do you remember anything particular about meeting Joshua on that trip?
Well, the trip was an incredibly powerful experience that sort of First of all, hi, Jodi. This is so lovely. Thank you for having us. I feel like, long-time listener, first-time caller. I've been a fan of the forward forever. And I'm just so happy to sort of be able to spend this time with you. I wanted to talk about when Josh came to Sixth and I, I'm still like sort of figuring out the pronouns there, but Sixth and I had an event called the 10 every year on Shavuot. And it was the one time of year that we really invest, I mean that literally, in bringing in someone who was Jewish, but also was sort of part of Hollywood to talk about their Jewish identity. And every year we had the same issue. It was like, there's that line that like, fool me once, shame on you, me, fool me, whatever, shame on you, shame on me. And every year we'd bring in some like big name to talk about their Jewish identity. And every year they'd come and say the same thing, which is, I don't really care so much about Judaism. Well, I had a terrible experience as a child. And it's just like what happened every year. And finally, one year we brought in Joshua Malina. And here was someone who actually sat on our beam and was like, yeah, I love being Jewish. And to have that happen, not only do they love being Jewish, but, the West Wing is basically, I don't know what to call it. It's like the Torah, in Washington, D.C. It is in such high esteem. So it was just such a win for us. And I got to be the person who walked Josh back to his hotel at the end of the evening. And I just I knew
we don't want to start any rumors now. So
no, sorry. And I left him in the lobby of his hotel. And then I went home. Anyway, I just knew right then and there that he was just a mensch. And then to get to go on encounter with him was just the best.
So now we fast forward a few years and a pandemic and like a couple elections or whatever. And how does the podcast get born? / why do we need another podcast about the weekly Torah portion?
So the podcast gets born because I'll answer the first part. You can answer the second part. The podcast gets born because our producer, Tim Shovers, came to me and said, we should do a podcast. And I wasn't doing anything. I hadn't had that experience. I said, sure. I said, let's throw a Hail Mary pass. And let's email Joshua Malina. So I emailed him and he wrote back. We already like the story is a little bit, it's like the story of how your parents met.
No, your version is correct. I've gone back and looked at my notes.
I mean,
Yeah.
between encounter and this moment, you guys have been emailing every week or no? Barely speaking. Okay. He's busy.
Jodi, I'm like a cohort junkie. You put me in a cohort and those are my people for life. So after encounter, I was like,
should we break out into dyads now, or we're going to do that later?
If you were on this encounter trip with Joshua Malina and Rabbi Shira, please put that in the chat. And if you were in Rabbi Shira's Wexner cohort, please put that in the chat. Right. If you have been in any cohort with Rabbi Shira, please identify yourself in the chat.
Or my RRC cohort, or my class at the Charles E. Smith Jewish Day School. I can't help it. I'm a sucker for families. Anyway, the upshot is.
Anyway, you're like, let's email Joshua Malina.
Right. And Tim was like, yeah, okay, good luck. So I emailed Josh. He wrote back, lovely email, said he couldn't do it. He was too busy. And this is going to date sort of.
I have one of those from when I invited him to our gala in 2019.
Really? That's nice that you invited him back, Jodi.
I've been inviting him.
Thank you for the second chance.
It was you that made the difference. Anyway, keep going.
So I wrote back to him, and this is going to date when this was all happening. And I said to him, I was like, Josh, as much as I would have loved to discuss Ben and Jerry's with you, I totally understand. You go, I adore you, whatever. And like, it was like 20 seconds. He wrote back and he's like, you had me at Ben and Jerry's. That was it.
The truth is I said no for a variety of reasons. There were some other things I've been trying to develop and do. And I felt like, I don't know that I have the bandwidth. I know what it takes, having done the West Wing Weekly, to put out a weekly podcast. It's a lot of work and it's a big investment of time and energy. So I did the responsible thing. I thought I answered promptly and said, I really do appreciate it, which was honest, but I can't do it. Over the next couple of days, the idea kept coming back to me and I was thinking, it would kind of be fun. I saw the appeal. And then when I got that email from the rabbi saying, for instance, we would have talked about the Ben and Jerry's thing. And that had been on my mind. And I had talked about it with my wife and maybe my folks and people. But I was thinking, this is exactly the kind of thing that I would enjoy talking to Rabbi Shira about. And so I did immediately write back and said, if you haven't gone on to the next person, and I'm an actor, so I'm used to, I assume there was someone before me, and I know there's someone right behind me if I don't get the job or pass on anything. And I was delighted that they gave me a second chance.
I got lost there when you said you had me at Ben and Jerry's. I thought we were going to talk about ice cream. I was going to ask you your favorite Ben and Jerry's.
I am a big fan of
flavors.
ice cream, by the way.
What is your favorite ice cream flavor?
I'm a classic Baskin Robbins mint chocolate chip guy, although maybe it's odd for a Jew. They do have a seasonal eggnog that is exquisite.
So shockingly, Jonathan Greenblatt, my guest at 6 and I 2 days ago on this couch, Breyer's mint chocolate. He's all about mint chocolate chip.
Ate a lot of Breyers growing up. Ate a lot of Breyers. It's a fine product.
Rabbi Shira, this is not my go-to question. I'm adopting the ice cream question from this weird thing that happened Monday night. But Ben and Jerry's, yes, Rabbi Shira, I do love ice cream.
First of all, the chat is hilarious. I'm trying to concentrate on Jodi and Josh, but the chat.
There's a lot of weighing in on the ice cream.
My parents are not here. So Rabbi Shira's parents are here. Rabbi Molina, Joshua Malina's parents are here. Thank God Carol Duran is here. Otherwise, I have no family representing.
Well, should we text them?
We should totally text them. That is I'm sure they don't know. Then I'd have to explain how to get the link. Anyway, what is your favorite ice cream flavor? And then I promise we will talk about the podcast.
Well, so I grew up, my father, Philadelphia Breyer's chocolate ice cream with the hard pretzels is what we would have every night after dinner. And so I'm also a fan of the ice cream cake, I gotta say. Like, it's just the perfection.
Every birthday still as an adult.
Carvel, I was Carvel.
We had Carvel nearby. And before we move on, I do want to say one more ice cream thing. Since my parents are listening, they were such fans of Baskin Robbins eggnog ice cream that during the limited time window when it was available, they would buy the 3-gallon container from which the store normally serves your scoop of ice cream. And we had a dedicated freezer, because they're huge, that just housed eggnog ice cream.
There's another great thing is now happening in the chat where people are like competing about how they know us. So there's someone who went to my elementary school who just posted. Beautiful. So keep it up. If anyone can get to a preschool or like birth, maybe you went to Lamaze class with one of our mothers, that would be great. Okay, so Chutzpod. I want to hear more about the podcast, but I want to start with this name. We have a rule in our family that if you're going to send your kids to public school, no names with chetz in it. So my kids are Lev and Shayna. My nephew is Noah, which is right on the brink there. But yeah, you went with Chutzpod, a name that every American can easily pronounce, and you did it. Even though there were some other really good names in the mix. A couple that I've heard you talk about are an actor and a rabbi walk into a studio was one of them, right? A little long, maybe. And then I really like this one, 2 Jews, 3 opinions. So I'm interested in how you came up with the name. Are there other discarded names, and why Chutzpod?
I liked for a while a quest called Tribe, which I think we decided was too inside baseball. You had to be a certain age to know a Tribe Called Quest. And then we also noticed that every time you Googled the name, a Quest Called Tribe, you got information about the hip hop group. So that didn't fly, although I liked the feeling of it. I liked the sound of it. I early on pitched the podcast of the Elders of Zion. We felt maybe that was best avoided.
That's still my favorite.
That would definitely attract the audience you want.
Yeah. Well, also PRX, which distributes our show and helped us develop it, they were perhaps counterintuitively excited about Chutzpod. And I think it's easy. I tell people you spell it like it sounds, Chutzpod.
Yeah. And I gave my daughter a name with both an apostrophe and a hyphen. So, I've already lost that battle.
Wait, what is her name?
Her name is Mayan Stuttman Shaw.
Oh yeah, that's a lot of name.
A lot to live up to.
What do you with Ma'ayan in secular settings?
She calls herself Maya in secular settings, which we can discuss on a different podcast called Manifestations of American Jewish Identity in the 21st Century.
Oh, we've got our next webinar.
One of my deep, I will never understand people's inability to pronounce Haaretz correctly, which has and every non-Jewish Middle Eastern correspondent calls it Haaretz. No matter how many times you say haaretz, haaretz, it really drives me bananas. But we can have a whole nother thing about names and pronunciations. So we say it's about the weekly parsha and how it applies to modern life. The name has chutzpah in it, right? Is it about chutzpah? You talk about a lot of things on it. Like, tell us a little bit more about the show. Like, what did you intend it to be? And also, like, what have you discovered in doing the first, like, what do you know now that you didn't know 5 episodes ago? Rabbi Shira, you go first.
Well, one thing we've discovered is that Joshua is a lot more traditional than I am. He's much more like religious.
Well, he went to a yeshiva and you're a Reconstructionist rabbi, so that was a surprise to you?
I know, but I'm a rabbi. I just thought that I get the rabbi card there. But so that's my main learning is that he's frummer than I am. He's just like, that's, I don't know. What about you, Josh?
Oh, I've learned a lot. I mean, in a sense, I feel like the pressure's off me. I'm a student, like most of our listeners. The rabbi, like all wonderful rabbis, has something to say about everything. She is a factory of creative energy. She really, I mean, so far every week, perhaps one week it'll fall to me, but she really generates what we're going to talk about. And I'm sort of reactive. I get notes from her. It always sets things off. I have something to say that makes me think of something else. I come up with a lot of questions. And I think I guess the biggest surprise for me is that although we prepare, and I'm sure the rabbi prepares more than I do, I feel comfortable now that if we had no notes beforehand and the rabbi just was going to tell me as soon as we started recording, this is the name of the parsha and this is what it's about, although I read the parsha in preparation, that we would have an interesting conversation, that we're never going to be, I think, wanting for something to say. We have to craft it into something that isn't 3 hours long and that people can listen to, regardless of whether they're Jewish, not Jewish, they're Jewish, but they didn't go to Hebrew school, they're Jewish and they went to yeshiva. We want to keep it interesting to everyone. So there's some art to that. And Tim Shovers, our executive producer, is a brilliant editor and brings an incredible, ear to what we're doing. But I think the greatest and happiest surprise is how easy it is to talk together and to enjoy the digressions.
I mean, it sure sounds like that from my AirPods, and I do think it's funny because that dilemma that like you want it to be communal and feel insidery and warm and like home for those who know, and you also want it to be accessible for people who don't know. It's something we deal with at the Forward all the time, and I have to say I think you do really a brilliant job of the way you bring so many Hebrew phrases, whether it's Rabbi Shira bringing text or Joshua bringing like a little bit more, the things we all say, but translating them, but not making it sound like it's a lecture. I mean, it's really well done on that front, on that accessibility front. So kudos to you on that. Yes.
Thought of one other thing. My face hurts already from smiling from this webinar, and I was already smiling looking at the chat before we even began. And you said something about community, and I think that's one of the other nice surprises. There are people in the chat that are that were West Wing Weekly fans. I see somebody saying Rabbi Shira equals Rishi, because that's the other wonderful, incredibly creative force that I was the sidekick to on my other podcast. There are people who are part of our unnecessary commentary. We call the commentators general. These online groups and groups that build up around different projects are so meaningful to me in a way that I never anticipated. And that's been also one of the beautiful things. And I'm excited about building a community around the podcast. I get much more out of it ultimately than I put in.
That's awesome. So I don't know if it's a sign of like my questions aren't that deep or sophisticated, or that I'm so on point when things people are saying naturally are leading to the questions I already was going to ask. But let's go with the I'm so on point part. Because Rabbi Shira, when she was talking about how moved she was by your visit to Sixth and I, she was talking about the authenticity of your Jewishness and the centrality of Jewishness or Judaism to your identity. And you've actually said probably a couple times now that Jewishness is actually the key element of your identity. I think in one sense you said that and being a father. And I think a lot of people would find that really surprising. Not being an actor or a man or a Yaley, I don't know. No, and you know, I often think about this. I did a lot of thinking about this after the election because there are all those like crosstabs of how different people voted, and I was thinking about who am I when I'm voting. But anyway, I guess what I wanted to ask you is like, has it always been thus? Have you always felt that Jewishness was the key element to your identity, and why? What does it mean? Like I see on your Twitter bio, I think that's a picture of you getting bar mitzvahed back in the day.
Yes.
But I mean, I suppose that is one way of saying, yes, Jewishness is the key to my identity. But talk about this a little bit. Is it new? Is it old?
It's definitely not new. As long as I can remember, it's been the it's been the cornerstone of my identity. I suspect that is a gift that my parents gave me, and then sort of doubled down on by sending me to Orthodox yeshiva, which some people have bad associations with. It was a wonderful experience for me. It reaffirmed my connection to being Jewish. My parents created a household where there was great respect for what being Jewish meant and trying to live an ethical and a decent life. And they were incredible role models and tzedakah givers, and they taught us how to give tzedakah. My parents created an entity at one point so that my siblings and I could help give away their money. And so with the process of learning to care about where that money would go and what causes we cared about and what organizations embodied and furthered those causes best. I got, I was really nurtured by my family and by my school community and by the Jewish community in a way where that is just now my prime identity. And there sometimes people will ask me, friends who are Jewish or aren't, why I do certain things, certain ritual things like keeping kosher. And people want a logical explanation. And no, there was trichinosis in pork back then. And I don't know, we couldn't, I don't know, having milk. They want there to be some health reason or some thing where it's going to be logical. And I would say, maybe there is some merit to that, but that's not my argument for it or why I do it. And it's kind of ineffable to me, other than to say that this is the very center of my identity. And so there's something every day that I do, because I like to eat, I'm reminded of who I am. And a lot of Jewish ritual does that for me. It grounds me. The world's a scary place, and it's not someplace I want to feel lost in. And being Jewish grounds me and puts me in a multi-millennial timeline, and it just makes me feel like I know where I am on earth.
So Rabbi Shira, I want to ask you about the identity question. I think people probably assume when the word rabbi comes at the start of your name that Jewishness is the key element of your identity, is to use Joshua's words. But I wonder how you think of your identity, what mix of things make it up, and where Jewishness fits in, and maybe just also riff on what Joshua just said.
Yeah, so often when I speak to a pastor, they'll want to tell the story of the moment that they were called, and had a calling from God. And they'll ask me about my moment of calling. And I say, no, that's not what it was like for me. It was just that I always loved being Jewish. I too, I'm a graduate of 12 years of Jewish day school. And even when I was little, everything I wanted to do was Jewish. When I was in middle school, finally, my father decided that I was too Jewish. So he tried to send me to like a secular camp to try to like get a little bit of the Jew out of me. And clearly it didn't take. So it is something I feel deeply, but I actually feel like the key, the sort of crucible moment for me in my life came when I started dating the man who's now my husband, who also is ethnically Jewish, but hadn't grown up with like any Jewish identity at all. No synagogue, no bar mitzvah, no nothing. And for the first time, I would say, well, we can't eat pork. And he'd say, why? And I'd say, because. And he'd say, because it's not good enough for me. I say, well, we can't drive on Shabbat. And he'd say, why? And I'd say, because. And it was at that point that my whole life trajectory turned from Judaism being about something that was about me and sort of innate to something that was about others as well. And of course, once you sort of face outward to the world, it's better for you as well. And I became more connected to my Jewish identity because I had to understand more of why we were doing this all in the first place. But it was always, it's so interesting. I come from a melded family, a blended family. We're 6 kids. All of the kids went to Jewish day school, most of us all the way through. And all 6 of us have very different understandings of what Judaism means to us. And so it's like, you can have the same container, whether it's yeshiva or Jewish day school, but different people respond to it so differently. And I think some of that is just your brain wiring.
Yeah, totally. I'm sure it's in the chat, but where did you grow up?
I grew up 3 blocks from where I still live. If you and my therapist want to work that out.
You got out. You made it out. Way to go.
It's like I crossed Connecticut Avenue. For those who know Washington, D.C., it's like a very big deal. I grew up in D.C.
Okay, great. So I'm going to stick with you, Rabbi Shira, for a second, or both of you, but we'll start with you just to why Parshat HaShavua? I mean, why is that a good frame to be able to have all the conversations you want to have? And how much is that really what the podcast is about versus like a gimmick? I don't know. Talk about why that? You could have done something else.
I didn't want to do Parshat HaShavua. That was all Josh. I wanted it just to be, I wanted to be more free. I wanted to be like a mix of like Ezra Klein and like Brene Brown and Oprah Winfrey, and we more free flowing about the issues of the day. And Josh was like, no, we need to anchor it in something.
Okay, so why?
I'm not 100% sure whether I am totally sold, but I am almost entirely sold on Josh's idea that there has to, and now he's done.
I'll come back.
He's like, you called me out, I'm leaving. So why, Joshua, why did you want it to be Parshat HaShavua?
First of all, in my unnecessary commentary project, every time I have a technical issue, people drink. So if you're playing, I don't know if the drinking game works here in Chutzpod too, but I have bad technical juju. And so things like that happen where I just disappear. But anyway, I'm back. I think part of the reason for me, I think selfishly, I wanted to create the podcast that I wanted to learn from. Here I go, I do my big statement about what it means to be Jewish, and it's the cornerstone of my identity. And where's Torah in that? It's gotten a little peripheral to me. Most of my learning,
God is striking him down with the.
Oh no! Am I frozen?
You froze for me. Maybe not.
Okay. Am I back?
You're back.
You're back now.
So I feel, not that I haven't thought about Torah or read the Parsha if I'm in shul, but I've gotten far away from. Most of what I learned, I feel like I should write a book. Most of what I learned about Torah, I learned in 8th grade. So I wanted to jumpstart my own learning, and the idea of tying, doing this for a year and tying it. And again, we've already done a week where we did Tu B'Shvat instead of the Torah portion, and that will happen, and things will happen in current events that may take over the podcast, and we'll pivot here and there. But I think I wanted it. It's the whole.
That's so interesting. And one of the things I wanted to ask you about was on the West Wing Weekly. I never really believed this, but you said it a few times that you basically hadn't really watched the episodes from when they happened till you were preparing for each West Wing Weekly. And of course you were partnered up with Rishi, who seemed to have watched them many, many times and studied them. And so I do see that Rabbi Shira is, a very similar foil for you. But so is it also kind of true that like, you probably haven't really read these Parshiyot like that recently, and you go back and read them the week before, and it's like.
Yes. Yeah. I mean, it's a little bit like everybody is, or maybe it's a lot, like everybody is invited to come along for the Torah lesson that I'm going to get every week. Now, I like jumping in, and the rabbi is wonderful because she'll always have questions for me, and whatever stupid thing I say, she finds the beauty in it. Oh, what a great way. I've already learned already when she says, what a great way to reframe that. She's saying, I don't know what you're talking about, but let's find.
That's not true. I think
let's drag you across the intellectual finish line and make it seem like you had a good idea. And I love that because you have to nurture your students, and I feel nurtured. And so I love it. I enjoy preparing for it. But most of all, I enjoy just not knowing where the conversation will take us.
Rabbi Shira, you already hinted at this a little bit, but I was going to ask you, like, don't rabbis get like desperately bored of the Parshat HaShavua? Like every year you got to read the thing and talk about it? They will not take away your smicha.
Great question.
No, there are very specific things that get your smicha taken away at RRC. And that I will not say even, in this, I do not ever get bored of studying the Torah. Like, I really don't, because I was getting, the reason I'm hemming and hawing is I was getting a little bored of giving sermons. I was getting a little bored of like hearing my own voice and my own insights. I mean, every rabbi has, sorry.
Now I feel like I should reframe the question. It seems to me like, so a pulpit rabbi, every pulpit rabbi like has their go-to story for every parsha, right? Or every part of the service. And so is it a real, I assume that part of the challenge here is to not give your TLDR on whatever parsha and call it up, but to actually get to something new and interesting and have a real authentic conversation and not be like calling up your notes from rabbinical school or whatever.
Yeah, I do call on my notes from rabbinical school still a lot. I see one of my teachers, Lori Lefkowitz, is on this chat. I call up some of the things she taught me all the time. But the thing is about Torah, Jodi, I'm sure you've heard someone else say, like, the Torah is the same, but I change every year. I am so different this year reading Ki Tisa about the golden calf than I was. I have so much compassion for I'm giving away what I want to talk about next week, but I am just like all about the Israelites this year. Of course, they're going to want to build a golden calf when they don't know where Moses is. And I'm just like all about them and living in uncertainty and what we do in those moments. And that, like, I wouldn't have thought that 3 years ago before COVID. So we just change.
So,
but some of my I do, for the sixth and Iers who are listening tonight, I do reserve the right to use some of my really good stories again on the podcast, because, some of them are too good to let go.
Hey, they're your stories.
That's right.
So great. So I'm going to ask you guys both to talk. Speaking of Parshiot, so I wrote, I am not a Torah scholar, and I'm a journalist and an editor. I do write a weekly column and newsletter, and a couple months ago, I wrote a column about the Parsha. I wrote about Toldot. I wrote about why Toldot is my favorite and least favorite Parsha. And it was the most read thing I've written, save for something I wrote about summer camp, since I started the newsletter. People loved it and they tore into me, and I wrote another column about their responses because I was pretty upset. I'm pretty upset by the parenting issues in Genesis generally, and in Toldot. And I have twins, and my twins had Toldot as their parsha, so there was a lot of this. Anyway, I want to ask you both what your favorite parsha is and why, and I would love if people would post in the chat their favorite parshas and why. Parshiot.
And whatever wins, I will lane if you want to stick around.
Yes, we'll be tallying them up. So who wants to go first?
I know what mine is.
Okay, let's go.
But I feel like I keep speaking first, which is such a female thing to say.
I was going to say that is not true. And if it was true, you'd be the first woman ever for whom it was true. So don't worry about it.
First of all, my favorite parsha is Shlach Lecha. It's the one, I do have a son named Caleb, so that's part of it. But it's the one where Caleb and Joshua, one of the most important teachings of my mother. It does strike me, Josh, that like this might be the first time that your parents and my mom and stepdad are on the same chat at the same time. I feel like we should have a little shit off there. But anyway.
Who was the other honest spy?
The other important man in my life, Joshua
and Caleb.
Don't tell my husband. So I just think that one of the many Torahs my mom has taught me is about the importance of the refrain, which is one of the things that I say to Josh all the time. It said, the story of what it takes to be brave and courageous is not only about the facts on the ground, but also about how you hold yourself and how you feel about yourself in the world. One of my rabbinic colleague friends made a funny / passive aggressive joke to me when she heard about the podcast, in which she said, oh, it's like Mindy Kaling says, her parents raised her with the confidence of a mediocre white man. And that's basically who makes podcasts, right? Are sort of middle-aged white men. And so I know, thank you, Joshua. And so, but I do feel like there is this mediocre, not mediocre. It's some of it is about how you approach the world and how you frame it. So that's my parsha. I love it.
Plus shlachacha has not one but two chets, so it's perfect for you.
I was going to say, yeah, the crowd.
And perhaps an apostrophe as well.
Israeli cheerleader, give me a. This is probably a disappointing answer. I'm gonna go with my bar mitzvah parsha, which was Va'era. And I think I like it because if I'm remembering it correctly, and I hope I am, Va'era is in Exodus. One, I like the fact that it's, your bar mitzvah parsha is a bit of a lottery. Some people get Noach and like just classic stories, and other people get like my daughter, Pekude, where 28 psukim of describing the tabernacle. And you're like, all right, honey, you got the short straw, come up with something to say. But Va'era has some classic, like you've seen the movie. Va'era is in Exodus, and God tells Moses to tell Pharaoh to free the Israelites. And there's a lot of hardening of Pharaoh's heart. And I like moments in the Torah when you go, well, this can't be. Like, it doesn't seem fair. This is like a story about Pharaoh's free will being taken away. Like it's a complete setup. And I like the challenging, naughty parts of the Torah that I make Rabbi Shira explain to me.
Love that. So
did you say naughty, like Knotty, or naughty?
Yes, not naughty, although there's some naughty stuff too, if I remember correctly.
So we are getting some great questions from this amazing audience, and I will be asking them very, very soon. But I want to ask one or maybe one and a half more before we turn there, which is, you mentioned that you did Tu B'Shvat rather than the Parsha, but you also did I think an extra episode after Colleyville. And I'm interested, I guess I'll ask both parts of the question. I want you to talk a little bit about kind of why you did that, and maybe you could talk a little bit about the Colleyville attack. And I guess I wanted to broaden that into thinking about, I was thinking about this when you were talking about your identity, Joshua, and how it's always been there, but you have been particularly public about Jewish stuff in the last few years. You very recently had this very well-read piece about canceling Mel Gibson. And I guess I'm wondering how much anti-Semitism and the apparent rise in anti-Semitism, how that's playing into this podcast. It's very much not about that frontally, but you did talk about Duke Colleyville and how much that might be related to your increasingly public Jewishness. Joshua, Rabbi Shira, obviously always a public Jew, but maybe we'll just start by talking about the Colleyville episode, which you spun up quickly and was really interesting.
Yeah, I'm glad we did that. And we did that in a way I felt comfortable with. I never want to seem like breaking Josh Malina's take on this, I'm just another Jew. The rabbi has some real footing and some real gravitas to her. I don't ever want to say like, it's important for you to know what I think about this current event, but the spark of the show is finding out, checking in with each other. And this was one of those things where I checked in with a lot of people I don't have a podcast with most of them, but in my Jewish circle, like, how are you doing? How are you reacting to this? Like, can you believe this is happening? And I was on Twitter all day and seeing people's reactions. And so Tim and the rabbi and I just quickly exchanged emails and said, why, I don't know what exactly we're going to say, but why don't we get on the microphones and share with each other what we're experiencing? And I'm really glad that we did. And I hope we'll do that in the future. But again, I'm always going to be try to be careful that I don't put myself forward as any kind of expert or authority on anything.
Rabbi Shira, anything to add on that?
No, I think that's beautiful. I mean, look, we knew when we were starting this podcast that we were trying to create something that really wasn't being done. There are other excellent Jewish podcasts out there, but there are no other podcasts that are both sort of spiritually based, sort of really widespread, spiritually based and not orthodox. And in moments like this happen, I just see, I realize that there is a community of people who are hurting, and we're in this new COVID moment in which people aren't going to synagogue in the same way. And especially we're in Omicron, like even more so. And so people didn't have the anchors that they might have had even before COVID. And so, yeah, like Josh, I really didn't know what I was going to say before we got on the microphone, but I just felt like one of the core things they teach you in rabbinical school is just to be a presence to people. You know, we might spend 100 hours working on a sermon, but at the end of the day, it's about how people how people feel when they're around us so much more than anything we say. And I just wanted people to know that we were with them in this moment.
I agree with Stephanie Fox in the chat, who said it was really a very special episode. It also has the great benefit of being shorter than the other episodes. So if you haven't listened to
wait a second, Jodi, can we talk about this for a second?
That hurts. Here we go. Don't encourage her.
This is very important. And you know what, people, you can weigh in the chat. I am a fan of a shorter episode. Jodi.
I mean, 100%. Podcast under 30 minutes.
You want a 30-minute episode? Turn it off at minute 30.
Jodi,
you know what? No, I listened to it on 1.5. I'm listening to it on 1.5. But it was
another great way to do it.
Yeah. So speaking of shorter, we have a number of like yes or no or factual questions in the chat that I'm going to challenge us to actually run through in that way, because none of us are very good at this. So what yeshiva did Joshua go to?
Westchester Day School, and thank you for everyone who's writing longer in the chat box.
I don't know those
I
people.
see you.
I don't know who they are.
It's a yes or no question. Wondering if Joshua's parents still belong to an Orthodox synagogue.
My parents belong, and here's an indication of something. I don't want to say where my parents belong to synagogue.
Okay.
And that's sad. That's not that I'm worried particularly about the people who are tuned to this, but there's a time where you share information. Now I don't want people to know where I am or where I'm going, and it's a sad reflection. But they belong to a
Rabbi
lovely
Shira, what
synagogue.
Actually, both of you, what translation of the Torah is your go-to?
Oh, well, anything Sefaria. But Sefaria announced today, but this is the one that I usually use. It was mine from rabbinical school, and I still use it at JPS.
I think
Sefaria just announced today that they're uploaded a lot of other great translations.
I think I still have my bar mitzvah gift from the Landaus, the complete Sansino Chumashim.
Nice.
And also I have R. Crumb's Genesis, which is fantastic graphic novel.
We have several questions from Daniel Kurzane. First, again, one word
I love
answer.
Daniel.
How long do your unedited conversations last?
Well, we try to cut them off because we want to save Tim, our producer. Josh and I think, could talk forever.
Yeah, we do. Just at a certain point we go, I think we have a show's full. It's never, I think we're done. But, at some point, is there anything else you really wanted to say? And often we say, it's okay. We're going to, I know we're going to do 6 episodes that discuss conversion. So we can save that. So we always have too much, but we usually talk for an hour or so and then edit it down to 35, 40, 45.
And here's this other question from Daniel, which proving my ignorance. I don't know if this is a question about the show or about somebody's sexual history or what, but it is, did you really turn down Sarah Silverman?
Oh, you mean on the podcast?
I mean, I don't even know what, is that what the question's about? Maybe. Did you turn her down?
For purposes of this conversation, yes. Sarah Silverman wanted the gig and I was like, no way. Joshua Malina is the guy.
Okay. And when is your book coming out on interfaith couples? Well, that was a harder question than it seemed like. You know what? There's another part. There's the second part of this question that you're going to like better. Will you be discussing interfaith relationships on the podcast?
Yes, I'm sure we will. Because work with interfaith couples and with converts was a big part of my work at Sixth and I know it's something Josh cares about a lot. And I mean, I do think some of the best members of the Jewish community are the non-Jewish partners.
Weren't Moses and Zipporah an interfaith couple? Wasn't she Midianite?
They were all interfaith couples. The rabbis had to retrofit back in that Sarah had a conversion, that they had to retrofit everyone back in as Jews.
So we have someone in the chat offering to come on to the podcast, and we have a question here. Daniel Pecoraro, I think is how to pronounce it, is one of the things he really loves about the show and also loved about the West Wing Weekly. The West Wing Weekly is the way that you bring in contemporary commentators on issues from the Torah portions. I thought this, I know it was like an old friend of yours, Joshua, but the architect on the tabernacle was particularly brilliant. They are asking, what is the process like for bringing in guests and figuring out where folks fit? And I, of course, also want to know, when will I be on the podcast, which is related to that question. I'm sure that's the main thing they were trying to ask you, but how do you deal with guests? How do you figure out guests? Why guests? What are they for? How do you find them?
Yeah, I mean, fresh voice and people with more knowledge than we have on a specific band of what we're going to discuss. It's a logistical sort of nightmare. And, again, kudos to Tim Shovers, because we're putting out a weekly, our schedule now is we record on Monday and release it on Friday. And we're not weeks ahead, we're days ahead. And so we're constantly trying to think a few weeks ahead, like who might be good to talk about that. And then when you want popular people who are experts in their field, they're busy. We've had people say she'd be delighted to talk to you, but she has an opening in 2023. Or like, no, we were thinking Wednesday. So it is a difficult thing, lots of balls in the air, lots of pivots and changes at the last minute. And I think we'll get better and better at it. But we try to sort of, I learned this from Rishi too, on my other podcast, because he would always say, do you think we could get Prime Minister Trudeau? And I'd say no, and I don't even know what I'd say to him. But he would say, well, I'm going to send an email, and then it would happen. And I'm talking to Justin Trudeau, which is intimidating and also fabulous. And so we're also aiming high and thinking, can we get that person? And, next thing you know, I'm talking to Congress Representative Raskin. And so it's nice that other people like to share their knowledge and their enthusiasm for some of these topics. And so we'll keep shooting high and trying to work out the logistics.
Are you wearing an Izod shirt?
I actually am. I wasn't going to reveal the alligator. I can be preppy at times. Well, we talked most recently, and it's coming out on Friday, about Parashat Tetzaveh, which involves, among other things, very detailed description of what the first high priest, Aaron, wore, and his ephod and his chosh and mishpat, the breastplate. And so we ended up talking about clothes. And the rabbi humiliated me by opening the podcast. I'm just kidding. By saying, what are you wearing? And I was wearing a dirty t-shirt and sweatpants. And so I thought, I'll wear an Izod shirt and sweatpants for the event tonight.
That looks like a new Izod shirt. That is not an Izod shirt from the 80s, right?
No, you're right. It's not.
Okay.
It's not.
But it is there's a nice vibe to it.
At this point, my shirt is new and I'm vintage.
By the way, people are starting to write in the chat who you think should come on for different episodes. And I just want to encourage you to keep on doing that. I think
that would be helpful.
I think, Judy, for Kedoshim, my dream, I'm going to say it. what do they say? I'm going to manifest it by saying it out loud, because Kedoshim has a lot of laws around sex. I want to get Esther Perel. So Esther, if you're watching.
Oh, we love her. We listen to her on podcasts.
But please send me your ideas, really, for people you'd want to hear.
During the pandemic, she's taken the name Esther Puro. And yes, that is a live bad joke.
If people want to reach Chutzpod, is there some kind of, I don't know, email address or Twitter handle that they might want to do?
Chutzpod@gmail.com. So definitely pitch us people, especially if you know how to get in touch with them and are willing to share their personal private information.
Do not send a message that says, please get Elena Kagan. Do send one with her phone number.
Exactly.
Excellent. Okay.
Chutzpod@gmail.com.
More from our friend Daniel. So Daniel Kurzane is someone you actually know?
Yeah, he's a dear friend. He's part of the Wexner, whatever.
He apparently does not get enough time to ask you questions. Or actually, you know what? He wants to ask Joshua a question. So fine.
Please.
He says, Joshua, you often honestly reflect that acting is your job, perhaps even your craft. He's asking, is actor also part of your identity? And how does that compare or interact with your identity as a Jew? This is a better version of my question. So Thank you, Daniel.
It is certainly part of my identity as you know, so is ice cream fan. Where they all fall in importance is I'm not entirely sure, except that Jew stands paramount among them. Yeah, I mean, I love being an actor. One of the nice things about being Jewish is I don't have to pursue it. You know, as an actor, where a job ends and I don't know when I'm going to be an actor again. I'm definitely going to wake up a Jew the next day. So it's a lot easier for that to be the center of my being. And I've also
Art, I mean, we should pause on that because there was a comment in the chat earlier about imposter syndrome and how all Yalees suffer from it or something like that, which I ignored. But anyway, but yeah, if you make your identity something that's not about something that's like outside your identity, you know, then you're not gonna have an imposter syndrome because it's really authentically who you are. So that seems really smart. You will wake up the next day as a Jew, regardless of what happens in Hollywood. I didn't mean to cut you off, but I just thought
no, beautiful.
That is really healthy. That's like super healthy. Go with that. So we have another very quick question from Marilyn Lebenz. Josh, are you related to Lester Molina, who is about 78 and went to YU High School for Boys?
Yeah, probably. I'm not aware of it if I am, but
Rabbi Shira, would you like to list any of your relatives now? Anybody you want to mention, just give a name check to.
Oh, for God's sake. That is very dangerous.
I was totally kidding. Please don't.
He is related to stuntmen everywhere.
So God
bless them for their craft.
There's a really, wait, you were related to stuntmen, really?
No.
Well, it was originally Stuntman.
Oh, Stuttman.
Yes,
God,
and then they changed their name, and then they they rode a motorcycle off of the boat.
This is how you know that Joshua Malina generally works from a script.
Yes.
These jokes are so bad, they go right by me.
They can't even be identified as jokes.
That's exactly what I was thinking. So Nathaniel Berman has a great question here, which is there anything you foresee as being off limits for Chutzpod?
Oh, Nathaniel Berman and I have had many conversations about what should or shouldn't be off limits.
That's an interesting thing.
Sorry.
What venues
I'm gonna leave that there, Jodi.
Off limits? I mean, there's just so much there to talk about.
I don't think so. I think Josh and I really, this week I was talking with someone who was very upset about something I said in a sermon a long time ago. And she said to me, "Why'd you say that out loud, Rabbi Shira? That's something we all think, but we don't say it out loud." And I thought that was it was like a moment of like, as a rabbi, I'm sure you have this as a journalist too. There's moments like, oh, I need to write that down because I'm going to use that in something at some point. But what I said to her, I was like, because that's what rabbis do. We say the quiet part out loud, right? That's what a good rabbi does. And sometimes we get schmeiced for it. And so I think I know Josh feels the same way. I mean, God, look at his Twitter feed. Look at what he wrote about Mel Gibson, so I don't think there's anything that's going to be.
I think we will talk about anything. That said, there are sensitive issues and we care about how we talk and communicate about them and in and around them. And there are things we look at after a conversation and decide to re-record, to clarify, and to reach a more nuanced position than maybe we were able to articulate at the moment. And there are other times when we said, we're going to leave this part out. But for the most part, we're not leaving anything out because you can't talk about that issue. We will talk about anything. I think there will be times when we decide we didn't quite get it. I'm not looking to provoke anyone or to offend anyone. I think that may happen. I mean, usually when I say something on Twitter and both sides politically, everybody disagrees, I'm like, oh, this is where it's getting interesting. Everybody disagrees with me. So I do like, I'm a little bit of, I guess what you call in Yiddish, a kochleffel. I do like stirring the pot, but with the podcast, unlike Twitter, I'm not looking to gear people up or to wind them up for no reason. I am, though, looking to engage in conversations that are uncomfortable, even to me. It's not like I want to put myself at ease and my guests uncomfortable, but like discuss difficult things.
Yeah, I'm reminded, I told you guys earlier, I did this really interesting oral history today with the American Jewish Historical Society. And they asked everybody who's doing these oral histories they gave us an artifact from their archives and asked us to reflect on them. And they gave me this letter that somebody wrote to the publisher of a Jewish newspaper in 1904 it was about the war between Russia and Japan. And they were encouraging them not to write about it, basically. And they said two things that struck me in the letter. They wrote, "Beyond that, I do not think it is wise for Jewish newspapers to go." And the other thing they said was, "It is best to let sleeping dogs lie." And my reaction was, no, wake up the sleeping dogs. And there's no beyond which we should not go. That's the whole point. And like Rabbi Shira said, to speak loudly about what's going on quietly is so important. And to have a place where people who really think differently can be together and in conversation is so important. So we are pretty much out of time. If people want to stick around for a couple more minutes, I'm going to do a couple quick tachlis things and then ask each of you to maybe just give a last word. Maybe I'll come up with a little bit of a question. But I want to first of all thank this amazing audience of our relatives and friends and old friends. Thank you for coming and having this reunion with us. We so appreciate your participation and your engagement and your love for Mandy Patinkin, who they all want to be on the podcast. So that is great. I want to thank Aaron White for putting this program together and hosting us tonight. I want to let everyone on the audience know that you, as I said earlier, you will get this video in your email tomorrow. Please share it with anyone that you can. And please come back to the Forward for other events. We have a great one coming up. I think it's a week from tonight. It's definitely next week. We published this amazing collection last week, the 150 greatest Jewish pop songs of all time. And some of the writers.
What a great article.
It was really cool. And they're going to have a live conversation about it next week. So come to that. Donate to the Forward. We're a reader-supported nonprofit. Please help us out. And those are my business items. I guess this has been so much fun. I really appreciate it. Josh has quit. Josh is like, I was booked till 8. I'm gone. No, he's back. Okay. I would just love for each of you to say anything else that's on your mind. I don't have a good question unless you want to talk more about ice cream, but Rabbi Shira, what else? What didn't I ask? What else? And what else is my question?
Well, first of all, I want to say, Jodi, I've been following your career since long before the Forward, and I'm just so grateful. Thank you so much for having us. This has been a blast. I feel like we've known each other forever. A lot of people have asked me what it's like to work with Joshua Malina. And so I have this one story about him that I think just embodies who I think he is in a lot of ways. And I've been saving it for tonight because this is supposed to be like behind the scenes of Chutzpod. So we were doing one of the interviews. This one was with the Washington City paper. And the lovely journalist who was interviewing us said, so what's it like to work with this person? I assume you probably are like a little bit intimidated. They're so well known and and let's just be, it was 100% clear he was talking to me.
I was going to say, he's obviously asking Joshua this.
But Joshua says, oh, well, it's just so lovely. And, he speaks so nicely about the rabbi. And there was just this moment, I was like, I love this man so much. Josh is so humble and kind and thoughtful. And it was just a really sweet moment where I was like, oh yeah, thank God I told Sarah Silverman she was out. Josh is really the best.
Sarah
Thank
Silverman,
you, Rabbi.
Also very nice, also lovely.
She's a delight. I love her. I consider her a good friend, and she'll be on the podcast at some point.
Her sister
thank
was
you, Rabbi.
literally my best friend in Jerusalem. So I'm
The whole family is fabulous. And
yes.
I've met her dad. I played poker with her dad. Thank you, Robert. That is very sweet. I want to also thank everybody and thank you, Jodi, for this. This was so much fun. And I want to thank everybody in the chat. I've been watching the chat the whole time. I've been paying attention too, but I thank you for being part of the community. I also want to do a very early Kol Nidre appeal, if I may. If you are, I'm not asking for money though. I've got a twofold appeal. If you enjoy the podcast or you enjoyed this conversation, please tell someone else about it. It's like the old 70s, 80s shampoo commercial. They told two friends and they told two friends and they told. So please help us spread the gospel of Chutzpod. And I'll ask one other thing, that you also make a spiritual pledge for the next year. If you're inspired at all by any ritual or anything Jewish observance that we talk about on the podcast that you've never done, commit to doing one thing you haven't done and let us know. Maybe it won't have any meaning for you. Maybe you won't get anything out of it, and maybe you will. And share that with us, because that's I think, part of our mission. That's part of my mission, to get closer to my own Judaism.
Thank you for that. And that would be a great place to end, but I have to say, I'm going to keep you another couple minutes, Joshua, or all of us. I mean, anyone who wants to stay.
I know, we probably should have ended at 30 minutes. I don't know. This feels long. This feels kind of long.
I wanted to, so I said that we are like really obsessive West Wing fans. And I have this, like, we have a working list of like West Wing inside questions. I'm not going to ask you any of those, but I was thinking today about this thing, which is there were a bunch of Jewish characters on the West Wing, and a couple of them played by Jewish actors. And then there's you, who's like a very Jewish actor playing a non-Jewish character. And I guess I had this, I was trying to frame this question. I couldn't make it really work. So I'm just going to ask it now that we kind of did our thing. But like, was there like any like Parshat HaShavua discussions on the West Wing set, or any like little Jewish chavurah going on? Or did Brad or Richard ever ask you of like how to be more authentically Jewy? I don't know. I'm just like freelancing here.
In the 20 plus years I've known them, neither of them has asked me anything. They're not that nice. They were not welcoming. They weren't warm. No, I'm just kidding. No, none of that. I definitely remember conversations about Israel. Some of them, as many conversations around Israel are, uncomfortable and delicate. And some people, I find, friends come to me with a chip on their shoulder. Hey, Israel guy, tell me what you think of this. And others come to me and say, I have an affinity for Israel, but what do I say when someone asks me this? And so, I'm always like, I'm not an expert on Mideast affairs, but I'm happy to tell you what I think. So I do remember getting into interesting discussions about Israel. And I remember also having religious discussions about with Martin, because Martin is a devout person and in a very
playing a religious character.
Yes, and in a very open way. So yeah, there were lots of discussions. And it's funny also. I also remember when Aaron Sorkin, bless him, great friend. No one's been better to me in this business than Aaron Sorkin. I direct appealed to him for the job on the West Wing. I read that Rob Lowe was maybe going to leave, and I hit that email and I was like, just pitching. How about somebody who's less well-known, less good-looking, and would work for less money? And he wrote back pretty quickly. He's like, oh, we were talking about you, which I still to this day don't believe. I still think I put the idea in his mind. But when
Sarah Silverman, they tried and she said no.
Yeah, so. She said no, thankfully. Ultimately, when he said, look, we're going to do 6 episodes. This is the character. If it works out, you might join, and Rob does leave, you might join permanently. And then he got really serious and he said, look, I do have to tell you, the character is not Jewish. And I was like, so? I was like, Aaron, it made me laugh. I was like, do you think I'm going to turn it down because Will Bailey isn't Jewish? It's not a problem. It's acting. I think I can do this stretch.
That is so great. I do have to tell you 2 things in response to that. One is that we are actually in development with a podcast called Israel Therapy, featuring Libby Lenskinsky, excuse me. We are going to do it in partnership with Reboot Studios. We did 3 events last summer, she and I, and it's going to be great. It's really about the stuff people always ask you about. How do I think this, but I feel this, and what do I do with that? And it's really like the idea of you need therapy to grapple.
I will listen.
It's going to be great. So watch for that. And the second thing, I imagine that some of those Israel conversations on the West Wing set, because there were so many episodes where Israel was.
Oh yeah, it was a very highly politically charged set because we were always talking about issues we cared about.
Right. So we watched the West Wing when it came out. We moved to Jerusalem in 2012. I was the Jerusalem bureau chief of the New York Times, and sometime in the first couple of years, they're playing the whole West Wing over again on Yes or Hot or whatever network it was. And, you know, I would work these like insane hours of working the Jerusalem day and then the New York day, basically, and at like 10 or 11 at night. Anyway, when the season was on, that was all about the Middle East, I would like watch it. I'd be like, it's okay for me to watch this because it's work. This is basically work. This is all just more context for my coverage. So
A write-off.
counts as work. Exactly. So thank you for that. All right. It's now 8:08. Sorry for taking 8 extra minutes. Thank you again to this lovely audience and to both of you. You are just delights. And thank you for Chutzpod. See you next time.
everyone.
Thank you for having us. This was a treat.
Have a great
Go
night.
have some ice cream. Go enjoy your ice cream.